Hey, what is going on, guys? This is Beanie and welcome back to another tutorial video. Today we are for the second tutorial today, we're going to be taking a look at settings, and hopefully this will be a slightly shorter video than the last one. In the last attribute video I kind of rambled on earlier today. I'm sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure I got all of the info out there to you guys in one video. I didn't want to split them up into two, even though that might have been the best option. But either way, we're here with the settings. And these are the best settings, in my opinion, that you can use for Diamond Dynasty. And a lot of these, I'll say, are a preference, but a lot of these are absolutely vital. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into this. Alright, with batting and base running, you can go ahead and ignore the difficulty. That is, just up to you whenever you're playing offline. It has no effect online at all. But the hitting interface, you need to be using zone hitting. All of my tutorials that I will be having in the future for hitting will be focused on zone hitting and all the strategies that go into hitting with zone. The problem with directional and with pure analog hitting is that there's too much randomness and what we call RNG involved. You don't have enough control of your bat, and because of that, users that figure out that you're not using zone can exploit you tremendously, and you just will not end up being a very effective player if you're not using zone in online play. So very, very, very important that you use zone hitting, and I would start getting used to that now. Because later in the year, I promise you, and honestly, it's a lot more enjoyable. It's a lot more fun to use zone hitting. It's a lot more rewarding. Whenever you get a base hit with directional or pure analog, you feel like you got kind of lucky, even though it might be a subconscious thing. With zone hitting, if you get a hit, you most likely earned that hit. I would use for your input type, I would use buttons. I would avoid analog, even though if you really like the feel of analog, maybe like analog stride, I think it's not as good, and I think that you're going to have some trouble kind of translating that into online play, but I don't think it's an absolute game killer. It's just something that you're going to have to practice a lot to get used to it. But if you want the easiest way possible to get used to zone, I would use buttons, and if you use buttons, analog type doesn't really matter. PCI, your plate coverage indicator. Now, this is kind of interesting. I know that some, a very small number of top players, they actually like to turn their PCI off because you won't have anything going on the screen, and they've kind of memorized in their head where the PCI is going to be in relation to where they push the left analog stick. But I think you have to have a lot of experience with zone hitting to be able to do this. I can do it, but I still prefer to use a PCI, and specifically I prefer to use the reticle PCI. A lot of people like to use the wedge PCI, and I know a lot of people are trying to get used to this dynamic PCI that they just introduced, but in my opinion, I think that reticle PCI is the least invasive, and it's very accurate also whenever determining like where to put it and stuff, and how it relates to your feedback and all that. Wedge is fine. The only reason I don't like wedge is the little dot in the middle is kind of distracting to me, and also it seems to make your PCI a little bit smaller, and just visually I find it easier to hit if I have a bigger PCI. Camera shift does not really matter unless you're using like directional hitting or something like that, so we're not going to worry about that. Hitting view. Now, this is something that is a bit controversial, I suppose. Hitting view really does come down to preference, but by far the best one, in my opinion, if you're wanting to take your game to the very top level that you possibly can, I think strike zone hitting is definitely the best. They have added a few strike zone cameras. Strike zone 3 doesn't even feel like strike zone, but strike zone 2, high, and offset all have merits on their own. So if you want to kind of get the same feel for strike zone, but maybe do something a little bit different, maybe try out these others to see if they fit you better, I would not have a problem with that. I still think that you can be very, very good while using these. I know a lot of people, they like to use offset zoom this one right here, offset zoom. There are a handful of top players that use offset zoom and have some success with it. And if you don't use strike zone and you still want to kind of have the best chance to be really good, offset zoom and the other strike zones are probably the best way to go. Ones that I would avoid, obviously ones behind the pitchers are really not a good idea at all. I'm not a big fan of the Show 16. I think it's kind of difficult to judge depth perception and the height of the pitch. Same goes for Fisheye and Fisheye 2. I would definitely avoid those, and any of the Show cameras or all that. Retro, I would definitely avoid. But all in all, I think the closer you are to the actual strike zone, the better it is for you. So yeah, if you want to take your game to the next level, I would use strike zone. In play view offense, you will see a lot of different YouTubers using different things for this. You'll see a lot of people that use retro. You'll see a lot of people that use dynamic because they like to have that feeling that they just hit the ball and now they're running the bases and all that. Personally, aesthetically it might be more pleasing or something, but in my opinion, the medium camera is the best way to go. It's the easiest way to judge where your base runners are relative to where the ball is in the field and how aggressive you can be on the base pass. It's a very minimal thing, and I don't think it's going to take your game or push the needle one way or the other that much. If you decide to use a different camera for this, but it is something that maybe could give you a slight edge in base running. So yeah, I would pick the medium camera for that. And guest pitch and all this is offline stuff. Okay, moving on to pitching. Okay, with pitching, this is probably where you'll get the most variance among players. At the top, the best players in the world almost universally use pure analog. There are a few that'll use maybe meter or something like that. But for the most part, you're going to find people using pure analog. It's not quite as vital as zone hitting is to being a top player, but it is something that gives you a significant edge, basically for the same reason, and that is that it eliminates any type of randomness. With pulse, with meter, with definitely with classic, you get a lot of randomness of where the ball is going to go based off the walk per nine attribute and how effective you are with the interface. But with pure analog, the ball is basically going to go where you tell it to go. The drawback to pure analog is that it's very, very difficult to master. It's something that takes a lot of practice, and if you started today, I think that you could have a pretty good grasp on it by maybe the end of April. You'd be pitching fairly effectively with it, but you would probably be going through a few growing pains in getting there because it is a very difficult interface to use a lot of the time. So keep that in mind, but it's something that I think is worth it because it does give you almost full control over your pitches. I can't talk. Pitch feedback, that just selects whether or not to display the feedback of after each pitch. This is something I would, this option has no effect when using the classic pitching interface. Oh, okay, well, I guess this has no effect on me because I do use classic pitching. But if you use trail, maybe this is something that helps you. I don't know. The pitching view, I would use strike zone. Now, this is something that I get a lot of pushback on. A lot of pushback. Because so many people want to use a behind-the-pitcher camera for their pitching. I think that this is a mistake, and I'll give you several reasons why. One, I think that it's very important to be able to visualize what your opponent is seeing in the batter's box. And since you use strike zone camera to hit, I think it's important that you also use it to pitch because you can make decisions based off of things that you may struggle against, and you can make better decisions as a pitcher because of that. This is more of kind of a mental thing, but it is something that I think is tangible. And I know whenever I've switched to behind the pitcher views, I haven't hit my spots effectively, or I haven't sequenced effectively, because I'm not really getting into the mind of my opponent and really seeing what he's great at, what he's bad at, and exploiting that. It's very difficult for me to do that behind the pitcher. Another thing that's a lot more tangible is base running, holding runners on base and stuff like that. It's a lot more difficult to tell if a player is stealing second in behind the pitcher type of camera than it is in strike zone or behind the plate type of camera. It's a lot more difficult. So because of that, I think just for the sake of keeping runners in check and stuff, I think behind the plate at least is the way to go, and probably strike zone. And the final thing that I think is probably the biggest thing is how it affects your fielding. It can be extremely disorienting going from, let's say, the broadcast camera where you're behind the pitcher. As soon as the batter hits the ball, you are going to be changing perspectives completely. You're going to be doing a 180 in the field to try to field the ball and throw your opponent out. And that can be extremely disorienting, especially on plays where the ball is hit really hard to the infield and you have to make a quick decision whether to go left or right really fast. A lot of the times, if you're in broadcast, you might use you might pick like the opposite direction to go or something, just because your mind hasn't had time to process that you've made a complete 180. Now, this is something that you could maybe eventually get used to, but why bother whenever you can just have a 1-for-1 type thing and just be able to field all of these balls effectively from the get-go? In my opinion, the only merit to the pitching, the behind the pitcher view is that it is aesthetic. It's because it kind of looks like a TV broadcast or something like that, which is definitely cool. It's definitely something that I like, is the fact that it's in the game. But as far as being competitive, I don't think it's the best way to go. So yeah, my best recommendation is to use strike zone for the pitching camera. For the pitching ball marker, this is pure preference. In fact, this is something where I kind of get away from the rest of the community. I see most of the community using the pitch trail. I don't like it because I can't see exactly how the ball is going to break. It's kind of weird how it looks to me, at least. And I just like the classic pitch ball marker, because it shows me the angle of the ball, the direction that the ball is going to go in. But if you wanted to use pitch trail or something like that, or even maybe even if you wanted to turn it off or something, I really wouldn't have all that much of a problem with that. Pitch confidence doesn't affect online, so let's move on to fielding. Okay, so there are only a few things that I want to talk about with fielding, and, well, one of them is the auto shift. I actually have the auto shift set to auto. I don't like to do that. I like to set it to manual so I can make all of my defensive shifts myself. But if you want that on auto so the computer will do that for you, you can certainly set it that way. But throwing, you definitely always need to be using button accuracy. It's going to feel weird at first, I promise. But if you use button accuracy, you should not be making any more throwing errors, because it's a very generous interface, and all you have to do is get the little line in the green, and you will make a strong, accurate throw every single time. Any other type of throwing interface like pure analog or buttons or anything like that, there's going to be randomness involved, and you're not gonna have that much control over whether or not you make a throwing error. So that is not something I would recommend in online play. Button accuracy is the way to go. Throwing meter, this is to display the throwing meter. Yes, keep that on so that you have a visual cue for when to release the ball. Throwing difficulty, you could set this to rookie to make it even easier, but they have taken that out. I think it's always set to all-star in online play. The fielding decision, I don't think, this in online play, this is automatically set to assist, so that doesn't really matter. Throwing decision, I don't think that matters in online play. In play view defense, I would set it once again to medium, since that is if you follow these instructions, that's how you're going to be viewing defense whenever you hit the ball. So, you know, just for the sake of consistency, I like to keep that at medium. It keeps me oriented and it never kind of throws me off or anything. So keep that set to medium. Throw canceling is a lot of preference, but I like to keep it off simply because there have been so many times, I used to play with it on, but there have been so many times where I have double tapped a button or something just kind of by instinct to throw the ball, and I've ended up doing a pump fake. And that's very, very frustrating whenever it's a routine ground ball to the shortstop and you're trying to throw the guy out at first. So, and I think the situations where throw canceling could help you are minimal enough that I don't think it's worth it to take that risk of turning it on so that you might make that mistake or whatever. But it does give you more control if you can train your brain not to do that. So, so if you want to turn that on, be my guest. That is fine. Everything else, I think that this is about it. I'm gonna turn these tutorials off. I don't really need those. But yeah, guys, that is it for the settings tutorials. And I hope you enjoyed it. By the way, I know a lot of people don't know this. If you're doing a franchise mode and you want to turn injuries off, go to the general settings and then click R2 to go to advanced and turn them off right here. And yeah, a lot of people don't know that, but leave a like for that. That little pro tip right there. But anyways, guys, that is going to do it for the settings. And keep in mind, a lot of these are preference, but a lot of these are very vital if you want to end up being a top player in MLB The Show. So yeah, I love you guys. I will see you guys later. But until then, peace.